Michigan.
Oh, he's in Michigan as well.
Yeah, yep.
Okay. So
Yeah.
was that
So
coincidence then? I mean, because he could he be put anywhere?
no. So if he had been guilty of a federal crime, yes, he could be anywhere. But he was guilty of state crimes. So state versus federal, two
Uh,
different systems. Yeah.
okay. So is that more severe in terms of sentencing and treatment and everything, or not really?
Not really.
What's
I have limited personal experience with federal, but I know some folks in federal, and I've had conversations before where some of the some of the rules may be a little bit more lax. Some of the allowances are a little bit better in federal. Federal is where you see a lot of celebrities end up. They kind of get the country club treatment. Um,
okay?
uh, Perhaps there's more money in the federal system. I'm not completely sure, but the state system is hell. And I can only speak from my experience in the state system.
Okay, so just clue me up. I don't understand the difference between federal and state. Like, if somebody gets convicted for a crime anywhere in the US, what's the difference in terms of whether what's the difference
From my
between the federal?
understanding, it would be the crime committed. So there's federal laws, and then there's state laws,
Oh, I
and you can
see.
break one or both. So in my son's case, it was drug charges, and
Yeah.
he wasn't trafficking drugs. He wasn't engaged in a federal level drug crime. So that was a state statute. That was a state crime and state punishment. Our state says it's
But that,
illegal, and therefore he was punished at the state level.
but but like the state says that's illegal, but surely the federal it's a federal crime. They must be crossovers or not. Is it not? And maybe I'm being really thick. Is there not then?
You're not, because I live here, and it would depend on the crime itself that you're charged with in court. And as far as I understand it, most federal drug crimes would involve crossing state lines. It would involve trafficking. It would involve
Oh,
something larger than you having a bag of meth on your person inside your state. So that's where the state
okay.
takes jurisdiction and punishes at this level. If you engage in crimes that, again, would involve federal jurisdiction, then you'll move into federal court.
Okay, so it's literally like larger, like if it's crossing state lines. So things can be a crime in the state, but not a federal crime, and
Right.
vice versa.
Right. So we have states' rights in the states. States we're one big country, right? But then we have our individual little dominions, where there's governors and a whole another government that oversees.
And so, if you'd lived in a different state, would he have had different uh, treatment in terms of his sentencing and his everything else? Or what would the
Yeah.
I mean, yes.
Yeah, each state handles sentencing differently. Each state handles the length of time that you do. So in our state, when you are sentenced to a certain amount of years, you will never get good time, what we call good time. You will never get time shaved off of that sentence here in our state. In other states, you may get sentenced to, say, 10 years in prison and do 3 and get out on good behavior. In our state, that's not a thing.
Oh, okay, if you get 10, you serve 10.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. But just so correct me, and I'm gonna be careful not to stray because I'm a paid subscriber, so I know there are some things that are paid and some things that are not. But I understand so that if um so the time he was given, that is the time he will serve, irrespective of anything else. There's no two ways around it.
Yes.
Okay, got you.
So
So does
so
that
sadly,
make
there
Michigan
I'm sorry, go ahead.
like on the scale of hardcore in America in terms of states? Is Michigan known to be really hardcore?
Yeah, Michigan has some of the most stringent sentencing laws in the country by far. Yep, and some of the longest sentences on record. Michigan's tough. Yeah.
And do you know why? Is there historical what's happening there? Why is Michigan so tough?
It's a good question. You would think so. We've had a Democratic governor, Democrats versus Republicans. Typically, we tend to think when you have a Democrat in office, they're more lenient. Has not been the case. We've had a female governor for the last two terms. We have a female head of DOC, and a lot of females in charge, a lot of Democrats in charge, and we continue to have ridiculously high sentencing. We have, of course, no good time credits, things like that. So no, there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to the politics behind it. Um, we're all scratching our heads about that. Anybody in the advocacy space here just cannot understand why it continues to be the way that it is, other than money. That's what we do know.
Okay, Occam's razor.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Um, okay, so because despite the data, because it sounds to me like it's a heavily punish 'em kind of mentality, even though the data proves globally that rehabilitation is how you prevent people going back in again, and how you know what I mean. It's like you're on a positive cycle there, right? So despite all of that data, do you feel like it's still they're just set in a is it mostly money, or is it set in a punishing mentality that could go back, you know, the entire history of your country, or what's that kind of ratio?
I think it's
Like,
both.
well, okay,
Yeah, I don't know how to put a ratio to that. There's definitely a mindset, right? That do the crime, do the time. That's kind of our basic mindset here is, you know what? You are an idiot. You want to engage in things that break the law. Well, then you can just go away. But I think that the average person here has no idea what that entails.
right.
There's a lot of rumor, that floats around until that the prison is not the country club. They are not getting 3 hots a day. There's a lot of misconception around what prison and jail actually is. And then when you realize what we're paying for, because our tax money is funding that, um, you realize how little rehabilitation is actually happening.
And how the money, yeah, is totally wasted. Like, just economically, it makes no business sense, really, does it? Except that it's lining the pockets of. Can you say who it's lining the pockets of?
Oh,
Private.
corporations, private
Yes.
corporations for sure. Yeah. And
I
then,
know you.
the towns where our prisons tend to be are sort of company towns, if you will. We have whole areas built up around very large prisons. It's the number one employer in certain areas. So that too. So you have a lot of wage earners living in areas where there are prisons. So we have twofold: corporate greed and corporate interest, and then it's one of the largest employers in the state.
Okay. And do you think, in terms of the like, let's just say the state mentalities of the people, your neighbors, if they really understood the economic madness of it, and also the true condition, like the inhumane conditions of it, do you think that would override that punish 'em mentality that's so deep rooted?
Yeah, I think every time I have that's why I write Black Sheep Mom, because every time I have this conversation with someone who, the best emails that I get or the best conversations that I have are people saying, "Oh, I had no idea. I had no idea about this. Like we have this tough on crime mentality, but I didn't realize what I was actually thinking or saying or sharing online. And now that I hear you talking about it and you have a personal experience with it and your son and all these examples, yeah, I'm changing my mind about what I think is appropriate." That's exactly why I do what I do.
Yeah. I mean, I really noticed. I watched the guy, the organic farmer who set up the farm in the prison in Maine,
Yeah.
and it was so beautiful. Obviously, everybody watching, if you just go to Bridget's, I can't remember which one it's in, but you just posted it. It was the newest one about blueberries, wasn't it? Was
Yeah,
it in that post?
bad batch of berries. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And I was really struck by him saying, one of the obstacles that he could get over was people were like, you know, they were they were against feeding good food like it was gonna like go soft on crime.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I shouldn't laugh. Fucking hell! Like, surely the end point is to help people to get their lives back together, right? But so
Yeah. It's madness. We think that, and I think the article, I think Chandler mentioned in that article, but what about punishment? Well, you're there to be
right,
punished. Right, well, the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
punishment is that you can't, you're not free to go anywhere, you can't visit your family when you want to, you have showers that, are on someone else's time schedule, your punishment is to be away from society. I don't know why we would need to add on then additional health problems because you can't get adequate nutrition. That's not what people should be sentenced to. In fact, if we're gonna talk about rehabilitation, they should be coming out better than they went in. So the food that is a drum I will beat until the end of time. Um,
yeah.
the food it's horrendous, and anybody who knows
Yeah.
knows. And there's so many documentaries and awareness is coming about. But today, as we sit here today, our prisons are serving absolute slop. So we don't have organic farms here, and the kick in the teeth is we do have some farms in some of our prisons, but they are mandated the inmates who work those farms are mandated to donate that food to local food banks and local shelters. In so much is that if they're caught even sneaking a bite of food that they have harvested, they will be ticketed, punished, and removed from the program. So they will no longer be able to work in the garden. They are not allowed to even have a bite of any food that they bring out of the garden. And it's, to me, it's just madness. These guys are going without adequate nutrition. They're harvesting beautiful vegetables from the ground and then have to give them away to the local community for food banks.
I mean, that's like an exquisite kind of torture, isn't it, as well, just to add? I mean, that's cruelty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cruelty.
Yeah. To me, yeah, to have it in your hand and then go, well, here, we'll give it away.
Yeah. And it speaks so much about either a decision or a cutting off from the understanding that anybody who has found themselves in that position where they've lost their freedom is already suffering, right? Like, you
Exactly.
don't add it, but that cut off and that in the inhumanity of that cut off. Do you think that's something that somebody who's able to make that cut off, do you think that's their coping mechanism with their own darkness? Like, that's not me. That's the da, da, da. You know what I mean? It's like, because when you cut off, when you cease to think the person in front of you is another yourself, you cut off a part of yourself,
Yeah.
don't you?
Yeah. I would say that I've never been through DOC training. I've heard enough and read enough about it that I think that we systematically are trying to desensitize or humanize people inside, and that's the mindset. That's the mentality. Is these are dangerous, um, willfully harmful individuals, and
Not
the
like me,
rate,
not like me, isn't it? Right? Like
right?
that. It's like, not like that.
Yeah, very other. Yeah,
Oh,
they're the other. Yeah. Um, and after all, these are folks who couldn't get along in society, so they don't deserve consideration. Um, so I see the dehumanization start. Even when you're questioned by police, um, here, and so when you walk down that road, you certainly aren't. I think that there are. I know that there are some great MDOC employees. I've met them. I have been thankful for a few in my years of visiting. And there are better wardens than others. So the warden oversees a prison, and I think that there are some who are trying. They are trying in the very limited framework that they have to make a difference, and that's encouraging to see. But 3 of the 4 facilities that my son has been in, the treatment even just to family members was abysmal. We are not human. We come in and we are treated very other. We are the scum of the earth. We are snapped at. We are made to feel small and stupid, and in the way. And, you know, we didn't necessarily do anything wrong. We're just there to visit our loved one, and they still treat us with the same disdain. So you can kind of feel it when you walk into one of the facilities.
Yeah, I was really struck as well by your record of the pettiness around and removal of rights, and that there's no, because it's so illogical and irrational, there's arguing with it.
No, and if you do, you're going to be tossed out. So I mean, the pettiness is a great word for it. Just and the rules will change from employee to employee. So in our
Okay.
most recent visits, yeah, like we had one lady that for whatever reason that day, her issue was we were not allowed to take our cup of water to the table that we are visiting at. And so she was the stickler about you need to stand by the drinking fountain with your cup. And that had not been my experience in all the years I visited. I've always been allowed to have my water at the same table. And someone said, "Well, is that a rule?" And she said, "That's been a rule forever. Nobody follows it." And somebody tried to say something else about it, and she said, "If you don't like it, we can be done." So it, you just kind of go. You just keep quiet, and just in order to, I had driven 3.5 hours. It would be a full
Mhm.
6.5 hours, almost 7 hours to see my son. So I'm not going to get mouthy and blow it. I'm going to do what I have to do to get through it and stand at the drinking fountain and drink my water. But yeah, they can be very, very petty.
Oh, and have you seen changes, either improvements or like getting worse in terms of the system in the years that you've been involved in the system with your son?
Uh, I would say that in terms of security, so my biggest experience is coming in. We have to be completely searched and checked, and turn our pockets inside out and be patted down and searched. Our socks get turned inside out. We take our shoes off. We go through metal detectors. And I've seen that increasing. So that, they keep saying that the increase in drugs inside is due to visitors and family members. And I've written a couple pieces about this because it is so troubling to me that is the lie that's being told. It's a
Yeah.
lie. I think in one of the pieces, I can't get a piece of lint into that prison. And my son is strip searched every single time he leaves a visit with me. Strip searched, bend and cough, the whole thing. So
Yeah.
I don't know in what world they really believe that family members are getting the mass quantities of drugs inside through visiting rooms. Um, it's not been my experience that any mom that I know is going in. If anything, we certainly do not want our children using. We are desperate for them not to be, to be rehabilitated. And so it's infuriating that has increased. I've seen new metal detectors being put in. We never used to have to take our socks and shoes off in the lobby. Now we have to do that and put booties on our feet and walk through. It never used to be that way. We could just kind of walk through the metal detector and then remove our shoes. That's not the case anymore. And that seems to change every couple of weeks. We have some new additive, some new thing that we're doing. Um, and they're getting tighter and tighter in that regard. And the drugs inside keep getting greater and greater. So, riddle me that.
And really, because it's obvious what's really happening, uh, they're practicing willful blindness, it seems. Do you think it's because it's just too much hassle, or it's reputational, or again, it's money, or
Well, they're
laziness?
on the front line, I my son always tells me to be careful. proud of what I accuse people of, and I should be,
Yeah.
'cause
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not in there. What I can tell you is, and I've certainly written with enough evidence about the actual things that have been found, is that we know guards are bringing drugs in. We know that, and we know that there stands to be a lot of money made by that behavior. These
Yeah.
are individuals who do not need a college education. They need about 12 weeks of training to work in there. You know, they start out at like
Wow.
what, 35, $40,000 a year as a salary. Shoot, if I'm told that I can make $35,000 for one sheet of, um, fentanyl strips, if I'm an unsavory character, I may just consider that. So that's one economic reason. The other is that we can't keep the positions in the prisons full. We are at the lowest staffing rates we've ever been. And that's for many reasons. One being that the head of our DOC is massively incompetent and needs to resign, and has done terrible by her workforce. Um, so, of course, we need to be a little bit more lax. We can't dismiss everybody who's working in the prisons, or what are we going to do? So
Oh,
I do think that there's incentive to just kind of look away. Because
yeah.
if we lose another 25% of the workforce, what are we gonna do? We can't staff these prisons. So,
Because population is going up, but prison guard is going down.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, right. I'm absolutely amazed that the program training is 12 weeks.
Yep, 12 weeks, and then you shadow on the job for a little bit longer, and then, yeah, cut loose.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty when I started to realize that, um, I was dumbfounded. It's dangerous for everybody, not
Right, it's
not just
dangerous.
yeah,
Yeah.
not just for my son, but for everyone in there. I work in mental health, and one of the considerations that I've had has been to, when my son is home and I'm free of the stress of having someone inside, that maybe I could work inside of a prison. And I don't have a lot of confidence, to be honest with you, in what my safety level would be. Not because of the inmate population, but because of the culture itself.
Yeah. Would that be a women's prison that you would work in? Is that a correct assumption to make, that women work in women's
It's
prisons?
not.
Women don't work in men's prison?
No, women work in men's prisons, especially in things like mental health and nursing. There are plenty of female guards as well. We only have one women's institution here in our state. One.
Oh,
It's a large one. It is plagued with trouble. In fact, in the last week, we've had two women die inside. Um, and I can't speak intelligently about the causes of those deaths, but they certainly are under investigation. There's a lot of neglect. In fact, I would tremble more to work inside the women's facility than the men's here, to be honest with you.
why?
Um, I believe that there's more neglect there. I believe that the warden who oversees that institution, is not doing the job that we.
Oh, I've lost you. Don't know if everyone's was still with me. Bridget, you've frozen. Oh, you're
Hmm,
back. Okay. Yeah, I lost you
I
for a
can
second.
I can
You're
see
back.
you. Yeah, I don't know how much you heard there, but just the women's prison, from what I know of it, seems very unstable from the top down, and it needs a lot.
Yeah.
We've had hearings at our state capitol about it recently in the last couple of months. about the neglect, about the health concerns, about the safety concerns. Um, it's a hot mess.
Okay. That's fascinating. Um, okay, but just to come back to your son, can I ask, was there a moment when you knew what was coming? And also, was there a moment when this outcome was inevitable? And I don't mean the moment of being charged, but the moment when your mother heart was new.
I would say it was a several year process, where he slipped further and further. Anybody who's ever loved anybody in addiction,
Mhm.
can understand that path. Um, he started an addiction young, and for a long time, I was able to convince myself that this was partying, this was, youthful, um, youthful silliness. And there was a point, I visited his first apartment, and it was in complete shambles and disarray. And he had been diagnosed with OCD, as an adolescent, and it was completely out of character. Um, so I think walking into that first apartment, I knew that I knew things were pretty bad. I didn't know how bad. Um, that would probably be the first light bulb that went on. He rolled a vehicle, at one point, and um, that was another. We're dealing with some serious behaviors. Um, I don't know. I think in the last couple months before he was arrested for the prison stint that he's doing, um, I could see him careening out of control, but he was not accessible to me. So he would not answer my phone calls and texts. He would not visit me when he was actively using. So whether that was I believe it was respect. He has a younger brother who lives in my home, and he always said, "I don't want him to see me like that." He would, lose a ton of weight, and so he would refuse to come around. Even, for holiday meals, he would skip out. So I knew in those last couple months that things were bad. But of course, you don't know until you know. I got a text message from him, that said, "Mom, I'm in jail and I love you." And that was, and I knew that we were on like strike three at that point. So,
Okay.
it was at that point I said, he's going to have to do some prison time. I'm sure they're going to either order him into residential rehab or he's going to go away for a while. So, they had kept our hopes up that he would do residential rehab. The prosecutor and the social worker on his case had recommended long term rehab. They said all of these crimes, which they were, he broke state laws. You can't carry weapons when you're on probation, even if they're legally registered to you. You're not allowed to have them. He had them. But they had said, all these things are stemming from drug use, and we believe that he needs treatment. And unfortunately, the judge in his case who had him under parole said, "Nope, I don't think so. And you're going to do prison time." So it's 2 to 10 years. That's what you'll do. So,
And when that moment came when you were like staring down the barrel of this reality, because we've all, those of us who have kids, all kinds of shit happens. But even though I know, having read a lot of you, and I have other friends in the same position and all kinds of stuff, it's like actually, it's like it turns on a fucking dime, man. It's like do you know what I mean? So I also know that, and so that moment when you were like, okay, no, actual prison. That moment. Can you just talk to me about that moment?
mm, it was a death. It truly was a death of the mother that I had been prior to that moment.
Ah,
And I've written about this, and I'm in the process of writing a book, and it's sort of the opening of the book is that moment that they say, they bring him in chains, waist chains and arm chains and feet chains, and he's in a chain gang. And it was a death, to know that I couldn't access him. I couldn't touch him. I couldn't say anything to him, that the state had just taken custody of my oldest child, and there was nothing I could do to impact anything at all. And in those first couple of weeks, it's very unclear where they're going. You don't have contact with them, so it's very scary. But um, yeah, I died. A part of me died that day. It was the most helpless, empty, gut wrenching, shame filled moment of my life.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And then in the weeks that follow, you just, I was working full time. I have other children, and I tried to continue, doing all the things that moms do and women do in the world. And I was a shell of a human being trying to do all those things. And I wouldn't realize for a while longer how much of a toll that season would take, but it did.
That first, when you say that season, so that first, do you kind of block it into sections now as you go along, like that first season?
Yeah. So he spent a year in county jail. So county jail is close to home, right? It's down the road. And I would be able
Okay.
to, it was during COVID, so there were no visits, which was brutal. But I could at least drive by the building and, you know, say, I love you, and pass the building and at least be in proximity. That's one sort of chunk of this. He would be sentenced, and that's another chunk. So then he was moved, he was sentenced, and over that afternoon, they had him on a bus to the prison intake, which is also in our area close by. But as a family member, you really don't know what to expect. So he spent, I think you usually spend between 6 and 8 weeks in intake. They have to do all your medical checks, you're quarantined. They do all the assessments to see, your mental health, your medications, what are you going to need, and where should you be placed. So that's another chunk of time. And that was almost an entire summer where um, we really didn't know where he was going. We didn't know what if he was going to be put into. At first, he was promised a boot camp program, so he would be like on a work detail, and then that fell through, and that didn't happen. And then he was transferred to the big house, what we affectionately call the big house here, and that began another leg of the journey. That's when you can apply to visit. That's when you can, they can begin to get commissary and things like that. So that starts a whole another bunch of accounts and hoops that you need to jump through as a family member. And so, yeah, I would break it into experiences within the time frame. And then we've just been on the long road. Every time he gets transferred, that's another sort of leg of the journey, because where he's been, he's the furthest he's ever been from home. So that's a full day to go visit. Whereas before it was, a 40-minute drive. So not too bad, but that's not always the case. Some people here in our state will have to drive 10 hours because we have the Upper Peninsula, right? So if you live down here in Detroit and you need to get into the Upper Peninsula where there's many prisons, and they do that by design,
Yeah.
it's, the turnaround on that is a couple of days to be able to do that. And so I was always crossing my fingers, please, please, please don't send him into the UP.
So what precipitates a move from one prison to another?
Oh, any number of things. So one, a incarcerated individual can ask for it. So if they feel unsafe,
Right.
if they can ask for a transfer. Of course, it is never a guarantee, but they can ask for one. They can be transferred for staffing reasons. Housing issues. So some get really full, some have openings. They can be transferred for medical or mental health reasons. Depending on the facility, they can be transferred for program needs. So different prisons have different programs, educational programs and such. So, and sometimes you're transferred for no known reason at all. They just don't like maybe things you're saying. They don't like the community that you seem to have gathered. Some folks who've been in for years and years and years gain a lot of, uh, strength and power and connections. And if that is deemed a threat, then you can be moved. So,
Okay. Okay.
mm.
So they don't, but do they have, so in the UK, we had category prisons. So Cat D, Cat C, Cat B, cat, and then like the almost on the way out. That,
Oh, that would make too much sense here. No. We have levels within each prison.
as in
So
literally like first floor, second floor, third, like, or like,
no, I mean, I guess in some they could be that, yes, but no. So a level one is someone, nonviolent crime, someone who's got a low amount of years or months in their sentence, first time offenders, that kind of a thing. And there's a level two, so that's just one grade up from that, which is what my son went in at as a level. I think he went in as a level one, actually. He quickly moved to level two. We can talk about that process.
yeah.
And then there's oddly no level three, and then there's level four and five. Level fives never see the light of day. Yeah, level fives are locked down 24/7. Most violent offenders, folks who have been deemed for whatever reason unable to stay in Gen Pop or general population. Level fours, which is where my son has been sitting at for 2 years now, are just below that. So they get yard time twice a day. They eat their meals in their cell, um, and their access to freedom and programs is greatly reduced. So we've seen 1, 2, and 4, and that will be where we end the ride. So um, he began at level one. He's a first time offender, nonviolent, came in with 2 to 10. And what happens is that you can rack up tickets. And when we talk about pettiness, you can get tickets for some of the most ridiculous rule breaking. He's gotten a ticket for standing in his doorway. He's gotten a ticket for, I'm trying to think of some of the most ridiculous ones. The worst one was that he got a substance abuse violation for having Suboxone, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but he was on a medicated assisted program inside where they gave him injections of buprenorphine or Suboxone. He transferred to another prison, and when they drug tested him, because he had quit the program when he left the former prison, they drug tested him. He was positive for buprenorphine because it had been injected into his system. Well, they hit him with a substance abuse ticket and said, "Well, you're not on the program here. Why is it in your system?" And then a month later, they would test him again. And of course, it was still in his system. And they hit him again with another substance abuse ticket. And what happens in our state is when you have two substance abuse tickets, no matter what the substance is, no matter what, it doesn't matter, you lose your visits. So we lost our family visits for a year. He racked up enough points to go to a level four. And so he was punished on top of being punished, mostly for something he couldn't control, which was really when my advocacy kicked into high gear, because it was unbelievable to me that even if someone was using inside, that the punishment for that is then to take family visits. The one thing that we know is key to rehabilitation and reentry, that we would take that away. He got bashed in the head with a chair by a cellmate, and they wrote him a ticket. They wrote the cellmate a ticket for assault, and because he stood up and defended himself, you're not allowed to do that. That was a fighting ticket, and that's a class 1 ticket. So major points. So the more points you get, the higher up the levels you go, and the more restrictions that you have. So you can get a ticket for having food in your cell when you're not supposed to. You can have a ticket for the list is endless, and I write about this in a couple of my posts. Silly stuff, and it's amazing when you hear about somebody who has been able to do a prison stint without any tickets. It really is truly,
like, sounds impossible to not get a ticket. Sounds
yeah,
like the entire
nearly,
huge. He got a ticket because he was administered a drug by the prison system.
yes,
Okay,
yeah,
that would put me in a high gear too. Jesus.
yeah.
Um, Okay, I'm going to go back to that in a minute. But so all levels are all in the same prison together.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, that's something that I didn't know, and I still to this day don't understand why we don't have like you're saying A, B, C, and D. Why we don't have level 1 prisons, level 4s, and level nope. They're all housed in different units. So you'll have a level 4 unit, but on the same campus you can have 1, 2, 4, and 5. You have restrictive housing too, so you can be put in segregation. I'm sure you know about that, and that's a whole nother unit. So. And some people stay in segregation here for years. That's
Yeah,
we
I yeah, that's I've been reading a lot about that, and I've been watching a lot of documentaries about that recently. I mean, it's got its own entire subsection of inhumane. I don't have the words for how any of that is can be remotely justified, except to say that in just intentional cruelty
Mhm.
with no other end but intentional cruelty. I mean, because it does. That's all it does, isn't it? It's that it's there's nothing else.
Yeah, and if it changed behavior, boy, it would have already worked,
Would
you
have done
know.
it by now.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
we would see the outcomes, and clearly we don't. So, I think about that from a mom standpoint. My son's been in solitary many times. One year he did over 100 days in solitary, and I had a visceral reaction to that I didn't even realize until I sort of had to take stock of my own physical well-being in that I couldn't breathe right. I felt like I was doing some sort of time with him because you can only get um a visit once a week in that scenario, and it's virtual, so you can't go see him. The phone calls are once a week. And so the whole time that I wouldn't be hearing from him, and you hear horror stories, of course, of what people are capable of doing to
yeah.
those in solitary. They have no voice, they have no advocates. And yeah, I wouldn't sleep. Anytime he went into solitary, I wouldn't sleep well. I wouldn't breathe right. I was on edge, and yeah, I took that with me everywhere I went. And I wasn't even in there, so I can't imagine what he has been through.
In terms of that process of that first bit of county jail, and then moving on, and the shock that you were in, and then fast forward to the bit where you were like got in gear and started really being an activist. How long was that bit? So I'm going to imagine. I mean, like the total freeze of shock, and then the bit where you just be like, okay, let's fucking go. What was that? Would that be correct?
Yeah,
and what
yeah,
and what?
yeah. No, for real. I think once you get permission, once you step your toes in the water, so to speak, and you're visiting and you've got a routine down and you know what that phone call is like every day. And, um, there's so much unknown in the first several months that you're just sort of trying to keep your head above water. And then you get into a routine, and every family's routine is a bit different. And my son would call me every single day if he could. Calls to check in, at least it's a 15-minute phone call. And so I expect a phone call either in the morning or in the evening. At some point, he's going to call. Um, and I think it was probably a couple months into that routine. Okay, we're solid. I know your daily routine. I've learned to go back to sleep, because I think there were probably 6 months where I couldn't sleep. I'd wake
Yeah,
up just 3 in the morning, like, you know, um, in fear, and you habituate. I feel as institutionalized as he has become, I habituate to the realities of it, and visit as often as I can. And so I think it wasn't until some of the tickets and sanctions began with him, and then certainly it kicked into high gear. The let's fucking go was over the drug tickets, and they took our visits away. And I had been nice. I had been nice to that point, and then I said, "Okay, now I'm done
right.
playing." And ended up, there's a great advocacy program here in our state called Citizens for Prison Reform, they reached out to me. Actually, I went into a private group on Facebook and said, "What do we do here?" And they contacted me immediately. And I've been linked in arms with them for a couple of years now as a result. And they basically said, here's what we do. And I learned about things like something called an ombudsman. I didn't even know that existed, who can go in and independently investigate claims that not families, because families aren't allowed to file the claims. But if incarcerated individuals file a claim or file a grievance, then the ombudsman may or may not go in and investigate it. And so I learned some of the ropes. And then I also got vocal on our own Capitol Hill here in our state, and visiting legislators and going to talk to decision makers and sitting in on hearings. And I still do that. And I will probably always do that. Once you know, you know. And they they woke a sleeping wolf at some
Yeah.
point, just went, that's it. And
Yeah.
there are so many families who don't have the means. They don't have, in my case, as someone who's been educated in health psychology, I have a lot of, you know, I guess, education behind what I'm saying. And unfortunately, so many families aren't listened to. And
Right.
I've had to throw out credentials, and then they go, "Oh, okay. Now we're listening." And that's really sad commentary that other families that you'd have to have some sort of, maybe, I'm sure my race has done well for me in those settings, where I show up this petite little white woman with an education and say, "You're not going to do this to my son," and then I watch thousands of families with the same story, you know, and worse, and they go unheard. But there is strength in numbers, and that's why things like Citizens for Prison Reform has been invaluable. Every year they do different types of legislative education days where we go and we try and educate our legislators on what's actually happening and tell our stories and be heard. And those things, I think, slowly move the needle. We do have some legislators in our state crossing the aisle on some initiatives, co-sponsoring bills to try and change what's going on inside, one of them being the ombudsman's bill and expanding what the ombudsman can do. Right now, as a family member, I can't file a grievance. Well, I may
Mhm.
need to on behalf of my son who might be in solitary confinement. Um, or someone with severe mental health concerns, or someone who may have a disability that they're unable to do those things for themselves and advocate. And so, um, unfortunately, as much as I dislike having to be in politics, that's one of the arenas that you have to step into if you're gonna do this thing. Um, and that's been, I think, not my favorite part of this. I've never wanted to be openly political. But like I said, they woke a sleeping wolf, and, um, I guess that's the route we have to take. So, yeah.
Okay. And as we just touched on that a little bit, politics, have you seen a great difference in the last couple of years with who you've got running the show?
You know, I have to I have to be careful here because there have been positive things that have happened.
Mm.
Um, we saw the first formerly incarcerated, um, head of Bureau of Prisons. Now that's federal system, that's not state. Um, but the fact that we have formerly incarcerated folks in the cabinet is a big deal. That's the first time that's ever happened. So I
That's a
have to,
huge deal. Wow.
yeah, I have to give credit where credit is due. However, not much has changed. So even though we have some of this mindset shift
Mm.
around incarceration and rehabilitation and sentencing and um, the real things that don't impact me, of course, are the corporate interests with big investment groups that have a lot to gain in the activities of ICE and privatization of prisons. So in our state, those are not private prisons. But where the corporate wealth has just skyrocketed in the last couple of years is in the ICE detainment, because those are privatized. So I don't see that personally here, but I know that it's happening, and it's disgusting.
Disgusting.
The wealth of these corporations and what they're able to do is, these are human beings. These are people like my son, and that human side of it really gets to me. So, but again, we have a Democrat in the governor's house here in Michigan. We have for 8 years, and it has only gotten worse. So I hesitate to cling to one side or the other, because as far as I'm concerned, we're all failing, and across the board, it needs to get better. Yeah. And it's a bipartisan issue.
Um,
It really is. This is a human rights issue.
and the dehumanizing crosses the aisle. And particularly, I think the attitude to I'm an addict. I'm in recovery. You know, I've been sober for a long time, but I know exactly what all of that is about. And it always feels to me that until um, addiction and addicts are understood as coming from trauma. And, you know, I always say, when anyone asks me to talk about addiction, I always say, look, you know, all the stuff I used, it was it was my answer to the problem called How do I live with this pain? And, you know, it was a really good answer. It was a good answer for quite a long time, until the costs were too great, and then able to get out of it, unlike millions of others. But I only know
100%.
that.
Yeah, Johann Hari says that addiction is a disease of disconnection. And
Right.
that's it. That's it. You know, when you're disconnected from yourself, you're disconnected from others, and you don't feel you belong. If you know, and so what do? We put people in cages and take them away from meaningful relationships. We make visiting
Yeah.
difficult. You know, we put them in with violent offenders, and we expect them to come out sober. And it's
Yeah.
madness.
It's mad. Yeah.
Yeah, makes no sense.
Makes it's such a collective madness. Yeah, I mean, everything you've just said, I just want to reiterate that's exactly my experience, and the experience of all of my, we're all at it, all of my friends, you know, we've all been through the mill, you know, like, and there's
Yeah.
absolutely no, it's about connection. Yeah. And to cut someone off is exactly the opposite. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Tell me about, if you can, if you're happy to, for the siblings, your son's siblings. How can you talk a little about that, and just tell me about it?
Yeah. I don't have permission to tell all their stories for sure. And I do my best to walk that line in the blog carefully. I know that the old so I have 4 children, 3 of them in their 20s, and one will be 8 in next week, actually. And so I have 2 spectrums of experience here. I have the siblings who grew up with my son who's in prison. Um and I know that road has been long for them. From addiction and living in addiction, that takes a toll on everybody.
Mhm.
They certainly love their brother. There's no doubt about that. Um, but I think that there were times that the amount of money and energy and resources that it has taken to, he was in and out of rehabs, in and out of county jails. And there of course have been legal fees, and I think that is a drain on the entire family. And so I wouldn't say, I don't know that there's resentment, but there have been tense times for sure. Um, they are also the older ones are also happy and want to see him home and doing well and thriving and back in the world, and to have a relationship with him out here again. They've been able to visit him inside. And that was always gut wrenching for me, to drag one or both of them along and, have them sit with their brother in his, jumpsuit and prison shoes and eat Skittles from the vending machine. The younger one has pretty much only grown up with his older brother inside. And so his experience has been visiting Big Bro in a prison, which was a controversial decision to make, even within my own family. Do you take a small child, a 5-year-old, into a prison? Is that okay? Is it safe? You
Mm.
know? Um, And at the end of the day, I decided that keeping their relationship intact was paramount. And so I make as we parents do, made the best decision that I could. And they have a great relationship and they love each other deeply. And visiting the prison is not, for better or for worse. You can say whatever you want to about it, but for my almost 8-year-old is not a stigma. It's just what he has to do to see his brother. He gets to eat a bunch of junk food there that he doesn't get at home. There's no screens, so it's game time or cards, and so we've made the best of it. But their relationships are strong, and it is my hope, I mean, that they, of course, all outlast me, and that I've done an okay job trying to keep them together through all of this.
And as a mother, how did you tackle the issue, or were there any issues around your youngest child's friends and them asking questions, and how did you navigate that?
Yeah, that was something I hadn't really thought about until it happened. Youngest mentioned in class and to his teacher that his brother was in prison, and uh, yeah, I got a note from the teacher just saying he had gone down to the office. And wanted to talk about that. I had, for whatever reason, it hadn't dawned on me that first year to make sure that the school knew that that was our reality. Just hadn't, and all the things I was dealing with, hadn't thought of that. In the years since, I make sure that his teacher always knows that that's the reality that we're dealing with. So it's not a surprise when it comes up. But one of the really cool things that happened is we have one of my youngest son's friends is a neighbor, boy in his class. And I was very nervous about letting his family, the boy's family, know when we moved here. Yes, I have 4 children. Oh, where are they? What are they doing? That's always the question. And there are times that I just glaze over that question and say, oh, they work in the community. They don't live with me. But with this family, as we got closer, it became clear that I was going to have to tell them. I have an older son who's in prison. And this is a military family. This is a fine, upstanding, wonderful family. And I did not know how that was going to land. And you know what? They have been one of the biggest supporters and can't wait to meet him, can't wait until he's home, asking about him, caring about him. And that for me has been such a gift when people
Mm.
respond that way and just say, hey, we all make mistakes. And
Yeah.
we're just to welcome him back to the community. So yeah, it's been mostly a positive experience. I'm sure there are people who I lost as acquaintances or said, ooh, especially as soon as I started writing publicly, went, no, thank you. Um, and that's okay. I haven't missed them. Um, yeah.
Yeah. We're nearly at time, so I just want to go back to the the life of prison and the legislation that you're trying to change and the wolf mama. What are the bits? When you're up there on wherever you are, and when you're there being an activist, what are you pushing for specifically? Do you hone in on specific things that you can see can change, or how are you
Yes.
approaching it?
Yeah, one would be visitation rights. Taking away people's visits is so counterproductive. And we do have a visitation rights bill that we've been working on for, it takes so long to get anything introduced into law here. Years. We're talking years and years and years. So anything having to do with visitation rights, because I know what it means to lose our visits. And that as a mom is just completely unacceptable, completely it has I don't know in what world we could ever think that that's a good move to make. So, and that's one that has some bipartisan support. So I will bang that drum into, until it becomes um, the norm here. The ombudsman's bill that I talked about that also is being pushed forward, and being able to have an independent body that oversees what's going on inside the prisons to me is so important. Who's watching the watchers? Nobody right now. We have the ombudsman who has to ask in advance to visit. So of course they clean everything up. You know, of course they have the chance to scurry around and quick, mom's coming. Fix it. So that bill would allow immediate access, and expand investigative powers so that they would be able to staff more. Because right now they have thousands of requests, every month that they can't get to. And then also allow them to have like family members file grievances on behalf. So that's another area. Um, and then of course for me, the newest and not newest, it's always been there, but if I can find a way to begin to change the way that people inside are fed, access to
Yeah.
nutrition, that will
Yeah.
become my number one, because I think that fundamentally changes the safety of our communities. When you
Yeah.
are fueled with nutrition, you can think and process and behave in new ways. And until we get serious about that, I think we're going to get more of the same. So
You
those
published
three,
some really great. Yeah, you published some really great stats from, I think it might have been the main prison, on like in terms of violence in jail and whatever it was, but it was just like down by 78%, down by 80%, down by 60%, just on improving prison food.
for sure.
But I always think like when the stats are there, but the governing bodies still decide not to do it, then there's an element where it's like, well, they don't want it then. Let's just start with the place where you don't want violence to be decreased, because that would be at least an open and honest place to start.
Sure.
Obviously, nobody wants to admit that they don't want it to be like that. But
Yeah,
I can
there's like
see,
this. There's like a magic wand theory that, I don't know if we just punish harder that eventually magically violence will stop. And it's just, lunacy,
yeah,
lunacy.
it's
So, yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And all the lovely people who've come to listen in, do you want to ask something of them? Just
Oh,
say something to them.
this community, I'll tell you what, Substack is an amazing little world. And the support here, because I launched the blog on Substack. I didn't write on this issue before anywhere else. And the community that has rallied, the people that I've gotten to meet through this, just, I can't say enough. So reach out, please, send me messages, ask me questions, tell me what you want me to write about. I'm here to link arms with anybody else in this space, anybody who's experiencing incarceration or family members incarceration, but also people who are working in advocacy and writing around these issues. Um, I want to continue to link arms and be a small army in whatever ways that we can. And then also for people who are just like, what? I had no idea. I always welcome questions. And of course, subscribe and you'll get the email about once a week and learn more about what's going on here.
Yeah. I'm glad the wolf was woken, 'cause
Mm, she's 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 alive and well, yeah, for sure.
yeah. My love to you and to your son and to your whole family,
Thank
and
you.
thank you.
Yeah, we send it back to you.
And thanks for trusting me. I really appreciate that, and it's really
Absolutely. I hope to talk to you soon.
you. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Look, everyone for coming.
Bye-bye.